There is a mistake a lot of sincere practitioners make without even noticing it. They choose the right operation, the right intention, sometimes even the right symbol, and still the result feels flat, delayed, distorted, or strangely expensive. So they blame their focus. They blame their discipline. They blame the method. But an older way of looking at things would ask a harder question first. What if the operation was not wrong? What if the timing was? That is where the 28 moon mansions stop sounding obscure, because they were not just pieces of old sky lore. They were used as a timing system, not timing in the shallow sense of good day, bad day, timing in the deeper sense. What kind of movement is alive in the field right now, and what kind of work does that movement support? By the end of this video, you'll see why these 28 divisions mattered, what problem they were solving, and why people used them when they believed the hour of an action could change the action itself. And if you miss this point, the risk is simple. You keep forcing clean intentions into the wrong current, and then you call the whole art unreliable. Here is the core idea. The system assumes something very simple. Results do not depend only on what you do. They also depend on when you do it. That sounds obvious in agriculture. It sounds obvious in weather. It even sounds obvious in human life. There are conversations you can have too early that fail. Repairs attempted too late that cost more. Journeys begun in the wrong inner state that go badly before they even begin. The old operator extended that same logic upward. If tides matter, if seasons matter, if phases matter, then celestial movement is not background decoration. It is part of the condition of the work. So the moon was not treated as a pretty lamp in the sky. It was treated as a moving distributor of qualities. And because it moved quickly, it became useful for practice. That is why the lunar mansions mattered. The zodiac was not only read in large signs or broad seasons. It was divided more finely into 28 stations. As the moon passed through them, it was understood to pick up different virtues, permissions, and resistances. In plain language, not every night was considered equal. Some periods were linked to journeys, some to treasure finding, some to learning, some to building, some to love, some to separation, some to siege, capture, delay, restoration, increase, or loss. Now stop there for a second. That is already enough to change how you read the system. Because the point was not, memorize 28 poetic names and feel esoteric. The point was, if the work has a nature, then the time should match the nature of the work. That is a completely different mentality. It means timing is not superstition. Timing is alignment. And once you see that, another old law clicks into place. Nothing rests, everything moves, everything has rhythm. So an operation is never dropped into a neutral universe. It is dropped into a moving one. That is the first turning point. The moon mansions were a way of reading motion in finer detail. Not just, the moon is waxing, or the moon is waning, but what kind of current is being emphasized right now? Is this a time that supports union, or a time that supports severing? A time for confirming, or a time for loosening? A time for gain, or a time in which gain leaks out? You can feel how practical that becomes immediately, because even outside phonal ritual, life already teaches the same lesson. There are days when writing comes easily and negotiation goes badly. Days when travel flows but commitment feels unstable. Days when repair works and extraction fails. Days when people come together almost by themselves. And days when the same room produces friction, no matter how polite everyone is. An older mind did not call that random. It tried to read it. And the mansions were one way of reading it. Now, here is the trap. When people hear this, they often reduce it to fatalism. As if the teaching were, the sky decides, you obey. That is not the useful reading. The useful reading is this. Timing conditions the field, but it does not replace the operator. The current matters, but so does the hand entering the current. A favorable mansion could support the work. It could not do the work for you. An adverse mansion could complicate the work. It did not erase responsibility. That distinction matters, because otherwise you turn timing into an excuse. And once timing becomes an excuse, the art becomes noise. So where are we exactly? Up to this point, one thing should be clear. The 28 moon mansions were used as a practical timing grid, a way to distinguish kinds of nights, kinds of openings, kinds of support. Now the next question is the more important one. Why did this matter so much? Because people were not only trying to act, they were trying to act with the grain of nature. That is the deeper Hermetic instinct. Not just action, rightly placed action, not just will entering the correct condition. If you plant in frozen ground, you do not prove the seed is false. You prove that sequence matters. If you ask for binding in a time of dissolution, or increase in a time of depletion, or stable union in a current associated with fracture, then the problem may not be your sincerity. It may be the mismatch between operation and moment. And that is why this old system feels less strange when you translate it properly. It was a calendar of tendencies, a timing map, a way of saying, before you act, ask what kind of movement you are entering. That is also why the lists attached to the mansions are so varied. Travel, buildings, captives, harvest, love, discord, health, gain, loss. At first, it can look chaotic, but it becomes coherent when you understand the logic. Each mansion was read as carrying a certain pattern of effect, and operations were matched to the pattern. So the real question was never, what does the moon mean in general? The real question was, what kind of action is this night shaped to receive? That is a much sharper question, and honestly, a much more merciful one, because it removes a lot of unnecessary self-violence. It lets you stop saying, why is nothing moving? Why is this operation dead? Why am I pushing so hard? And start asking, am I trying to force the wrong thing through the wrong gate? That question alone can save years of confusion, because one of the cruelest habits in spiritual work is this. We repeat an action in the wrong condition, then conclude that the action itself has no life. But sometimes the action has life. It was just mistimed. And here is the bascule. The moon mansions are most useful when you stop treating them as exotic content and start seeing what they were really trying to teach. Timing is part of causation. That is the idea. Not everything that fails is false. Not everything that resists should be forced. Not every delay is a denial. Sometimes the field is simply shaped for another kind of work. Once you understand that, the system becomes gentler and more exact at the same time. You become less dramatic, more observant, less obsessed with forcing results, more interested in reading conditions. And that change alone can make a practitioner feel better, because it turns failure into diagnosis. It turns noise into pattern. It turns nothing works into, this was the wrong night for this kind of act. So if the 28 moon mansions ever sounded like useless old complexity, this is the simpler truth. They were ancient timing tools, a way of dividing the moving field into readable phases so action could be matched to condition, not because the heavens replaced the work, but because the work was believed to land differently depending on when it was done. And once you really feel that, you stop asking only, what do I want to do? You also ask, what is this moment built to carry? If this gave you a cleaner way to read old celestial practice, like the video and subscribe.